Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight, we are going to be venturing into the depths and the darkness within caves. Who knows what horrors might be lurking within them, or the danger you might put yourself in by exploring them. So get ready, because it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I was hiking in the hills in Butterfly Valley, Rhodes, with my parents on my 10th birthday. We were having a lovely day following butterflies, enjoying the scenery, etc. As anyone who has been to Butterfly Valley will know, at some point on the trail there's a pitch black tunnel filled to your ankles with water that's popular with tourists. You can walk from one end to the other. It's about a 10 to 15 minute walk if I remember correctly, or escape up a ladder through an opening halfway, if you're feeling uncomfortable. It really is pitch black, very spooky, and isn't claustrophobic friendly. I'm ashamed to say I've forgotten the history surrounding it, but it's about 6 foot high and just wide enough for an adult and small child to squeeze through alongside each other. Anyway, we are about to brave the tunnel with a big group of people when my mum nopes out big style, saying it's too much for her claustrophobia with people both in front and flanking her in the dark, as well as being a confined space. She takes the above ground trail with a group of other people to meet us at the other side. Dad and I enjoy the thrill of the tunnel walk. People's frightened cries, screams and echoes included. It's just the kind of people we are. It was a very cool experience, especially for a kid. Far from scaring me, it definitely desensitized me to spooky tunnels, helping pave the way for the frightening event later. We met Mum on the other side and continue our exploration along the main trail that leads to a monastery atop the mountain, describing our tunnel experience to her along the way. Eventually, I don't remember why, possibly to follow a pretty nice looking butterfly, we veer off the main trail into the denser forest, and after a few minutes, notice a cave-like opening on a slope to our left. It has lots of jagged rocks and thick bushes surrounding it, suggesting it's not supposed to be accessed by tourists. But since Dad and I are feeling more Indiana Jones than usual after our tunnel trip, we decide we want to enter the cave and see what's inside and where it leads to, if anything. In hindsight, this is a very stupid idea. My dad takes my hand, pushes the bushes aside and we step in, leaving Mum at the entrance. We realize this cave tunnel also has a stream running through it, much like the first, just over ankle deep, and we carelessly trapeze along the uneven path in our already soaked sandals. We are chatting away loudly and not minding that the cave is growing ever darker and we can't see where we are stepping. We walk for less than a minute or so. I don't know exactly what made my dad suddenly fall silent, and neither did he. But as he did, in the now almost pitch black, we both realize, with a horrified jolt, that we could hear the sound of falling water right in front of us. I mean, directly in front of our feet, and it sounded like a long drop. At that moment, I realize I can feel a light breeze against my legs, lifting the edge of my skirt exactly like the updraft you get from waterfalls. I've never squeezed my dad's hand so tightly in my life. After a stunned silence that couldn't have lasted more than 1/10 of a second, my dad grabs me, lifts me up, and proceeds to carry me at a desperate half-run back to the entrance. He told me many years later that he's never been more scared in his life. The more I tell this story, the more I think how ridiculous our decision to explore the cave was, and how easily we could have slipped over the edge and been injured, become trapped, or even plummeted to our certain deaths. Remembering the sound of the falling water and the sensation of the air rushing against my legs still chills my blood to this day. What made the whole thing worse was seeing my dad so panicked. The only other time I've known him to act that way was when I choked on a sweet when I was little. The look he had on his face during both these events is one I've only ever seen when he's fearing for my life. On a lighter note, we made it to the monastery atop the mountain and ordered bowls of Greek yogurt and honey from the monastery cafe to cheer us up and celebrate my birthday. It was delightful. I still haven't found out anything about the interior of the cave. If anyone has any information about caves in Butterfly Valley, I would love to hear it. During some cave exploring, or spelunking, I don't know the difference between them, my family and some friends were in some deep caves, and as we were heading out, we found a slit about knee-high in the rock. Getting on your stomach there was a tight squeeze, and you could get into it and lead to a small crawl space in the rock, with quartz growing on the ceiling, making a beautiful crystal ceiling display. We went in one by one, and if you were claustrophobic, this place was your living nightmare. Most times, you could feel the ceiling on your back and the floor on your stomach every time you took a breath. We went deep in, and it was just incredible, like a small world tucked away within solid rock. I had made it in as deep as I could go, before the path wound to the left, covered with stalagmites and stalactites of sediment. Everyone was having a grand time, when we started feeling some trickles of water on our backs. It turns out it was raining outside, and with the way the crawl space dripped down before flattening out, this whole place would fill up with rainwater pretty damn quickly, but the only way out for it to drain out would be the way we came in. It started as trickles before it just went into streams and began to pool up. Being the furthest away from the exit, and you can only crawl out flat on your stomach with jagged crystals pointing down the ceiling, I started to panic a bit. Everyone crawled out as fast as they could as the water kept coming in, the streams growing larger and larger. We left one at a time as fast as we could, but it wasn't fast enough, and I could feel the water coming up to my chin as I crawled behind my brother. Each inch I took forward felt so painfully slow that I could feel the walls compress around me, and the water was unrelenting, now splashing against my panicked squirms. I got out just as the water was up to my lips, and everyone got out safely. I am not eager to try that again. I go caving with my dad, who grew up mining uranium until his family's mine went belly up. He's pretty used to enclosed spaces and being underground, and I was raised similarly, albeit without the radon gas. I've rappelled into pits I can't see the bottom of, bouldered my way along and over the largest underwater rivers in Northern America, and nearly caught in a flash flood, and slipped into a crevice whose bottom is, as of today, not mapped, and has never been reached or documented by anyone. It was by far the scariest damn thing to ever happen to me. I had to brace myself, with my feet back against one wall and stretched out in front of me, arms on either side. I was in a pretty good spot to be in, roughly 10 feet down, on wet, smooth rock, as my headlamp had come unplugged from its battery in my pack, meaning I only had the light from my dad looking down on me 10 feet up to see by. He had to leave to get the rope, and I couldn't really go anywhere or reattach my lamp into my position. So I got to chill in that crevice for roughly an hour. But God, it felt like so much longer. I thought the fall itself was scary, but it was nothing compared to that complete darkness. And it was so quiet, I could hear my blood rushing in my ears. Every piece of gravel that came loose from the tread of my boot, hitting the side of the crevice, on the way down just fading out. I started seeing lights and little flashes, and I couldn't tell if my eyes were open or closed, and I couldn't move to check, or I'd fall God knows how far. I could hear more than I ever wanted to, while simultaneously experiencing the most quiet I'd ever felt, and all I could feel was the rock against my back and hands, and presumably what my feet were braced against. I started to not be able to tell up from down, started hearing footsteps and seeing movement and shapes from the corners of my eyes. It was utter hell waiting for my dad to come back with rope to help me out. I know what I experienced was just due to a lack of visual and auditory stimuli, but damn, it was the scariest thing I've ever experienced. And we always bring a good amount of rope with us now, even if we think we won't need it in that cave. I had been caving as a hobby for several years. Nothing really creepy ever happens caving, but I have been in some dangerous situations which had left me questioning my sanity, or the sanity of those around me. So I used to cave with a gang of people from a university club. But I had been out of the university a few years and had been doing things on my own. Well, one weekend, me and my friends, let's call her Jane, decided we should go on a little trip to a cave with these guys. You know, to see how the old club was doing. The club that taught us how to cave, and we in turn taught the new guys when we were the oldies. So anyway, it's going okay, and me and Jane go off caving on our own. But that evening we decide to join the group and cave with them in an area near the campsite. Now it was raining a bit, and I was starting to feel uneasy. But to be honest, I never voiced my concerns and just went with it. A large group of about 10 people getting to the cave. The cave is basically a river on the inside, normally, but it has a few levels of corridors that you can explore high above the river. The entrance is super tight though, and requires you to climb down this tight pipe using your feet to feel for footholds. There is no way to see what is below you, and basically if you lose your footing, there is a nasty fall of 3 meters. But keep your head on and it's fine. Well anyway, we get to the cave and the guys in the club are doing their thing. Me and Jane are just the old dudes coming along for old times. We get into the cave, and there's one girl who gets stuck in the entrance at the end of the group. Turns out it was her second cave ever, and they brought her into this one, even though she panicked in a much larger cave earlier that day. 2 of the leaders stayed behind to help her calm down and get her into the cave, and the rest of us pot her on, down some of the long corridors and start exploring the cave. That's when I asked the group leader, a girl I had taught how to cave, let's call her Idiot, what time it is. She tells me she does not have a watch, and I ask her, how does she know what time to leave the cave at, to be on time for the call-out? A call-out is arguably the most important thing caving. It's where you let someone on the surface, even your buddy, who you ring, know that you and whoever else are going into this cave and will be out at this time. Without a call-out, no one knows you are missing for days and have hundreds of caves to check. Anyway, the leader of all these sweet innocent beginners tells me that she did not leave a call-out or bring any first aid kit or safety equipment. I hold my cool because I don't want the others to panic, but I tell her quietly, I am now the call-out. Be out of the cave at this time, and I will give her my watch and start back towards the entrance. At the entrance, the 2 other leaders are sitting with the girl who got stuck earlier. They managed to get her into the cave and are sitting with her. I tell them the situation and tell them I'm leaving, and they ask me to go get an SRT kit. basically ropes and a harness, in case the panicked girl needs it to climb back up. So I do just that. A while later, I come back with the gear, which they did not have all of, and I had to borrow off other cavers who were luckily at the same campsite. I get back to the cave, and the others are leaving, slowly, as it's a difficult entrance and climbing out is harder. They all manage to get out, but lo and behold, panicked girl gets stuck, and with 2 leaders strapped below her, she is blocking the entrance. We harness her up, and I rig her up an anchor and try to secure her on a rope in case she falls, but she is wedged tight. I then get the news from the others below that the cave is starting to fill because of the rain, and after what seems like an eternity of them nicely talking to this panicked girl, telling her she's doing great and she'll definitely be fine, as she's getting worse at this stage, I freak out. I shout at her that she needs to get her act together and get out of the cave, because 2 others are stuck behind her. It kind of works, and she nearly stops having a panic attack. Not entirely, but stops hyperventilating, which just makes her more stuck. She still won't climb out though, so against all common sense, I lie down into the hole and grab her by the harness and pull her out of the cave. After that, I told the club they needed to get their crap together and stop being cowboys, but I haven't gone back to them since. Why do they risk so many lives? My girlfriend and I were in Tulum, Mexico, and were planning on visiting a cenote a few kilometers out of town. We had hired bikes, so the ride should only take about 15 to 20 minutes down the highway. After riding for about 30 minutes along the highway that was surrounded on both sides by heavy jungle, we saw a path leading into said jungle, with a life jacket by the entrance. There were no signs, but we assumed this must be it, as it was quite common for people to wear life jackets at cenotes. So we began down the trail, still seeing no signage of any people, and we continued down the trail for about 1 kilometer. We kind of realized at this point that this was probably not the way to the cenote, but decided we should go down a little further just in case. It began to feel a little creepy, as the path had previously been well used and was starting to become overgrown. Eventually we reached a point where we could no longer ride the bikes, but could only continue on foot. I told my girlfriend to wait with the bikes, and I would go in a few more meters and check what I could see. After walking a little way down the path and out of the sight of the bikes and my girlfriend, I came to a little clearing that had what looked like a cave opening in a kind of rounded shape, like a mouth. I was already kind of freaking out, as we were so far off the main road in the middle of the jungle, with no signs of anyone else around. Then I saw a wooden post with an arrow painted on it that pointed to the opening of the cave. So I crept a little bit closer to check it out, and that's when I saw another sign, again painted. However, this one had a little message on it. Aquí duerme el diablo los viernes, which translates to, the devil sleeps here on Fridays. This was probably just a prank by some kids, or a sign to keep people out of private land, but as I was already really scared in this weird place, I sprinted back to my girlfriend, and we got on the bikes and rode away as fast as we could. I grew up down in the desert, where there was a lot of old abandoned mine shafts. We would go exploring the mine shafts for fun. There would always be some level of danger. It was common to see old abandoned boxes of dynamite and leftover mining equipment. One time, we went and explored this vertical mine shaft, which had a ladder that worked its way down. The ladder had a platform about every 20 feet and a hatch that would continue to the next level. I was with about 6 other people, I believe, and we had gone down to the bottom of the mine shaft. I guess it was about 700 feet down. or 200 meters, and we get to the point where the shaft is full of water. We all decide to go swimming in the water, which was creepy on its own, but as we were climbing up, I was looking up and I could see a little light moving around. I began realizing that someone else was in this mine shaft, and I came to one of the hatches and had just poked my head out when I looked to my right and I see a flash of light moving very rapidly towards me, and then the hatch was slammed shut on me. Someone was standing on the hatch, and I could not open it. I was able to open the hatch after about 5 minutes, and it turned out to be just someone that recognized our cars and was a friend of ours, and they were messing with us. But my God, it was so terrifying in that moment. I've never shared this story with anyone before, not only because it sounds insane, but because it was the scariest thing that had ever happened to me and my friends. Since the event, none of us speak about it. Here is what happened about 20 years ago. I live in the rural south of England. Near where I live is a small patch of wooded area. It was about a 10-minute walk away from my house, as we lived on a farmstead. There weren't many of us kids in the area. The village was quite small, and there was a group of about 5 of us boys that liked to hang out in the woods and ride our bikes. There was a feature about these woods that always interested me. The woods themselves were standard enough, but further in, you had a kind of dip, almost like the ground had been scooped out. Don't misunderstand. This dip was by no means small. I assume it was a relic from the war, where someone had dropped a bomb and the impact stayed as it was, with no one coming near to repair it, as there would have been no need to. The strange thing about this, though, is that there were grates. Not in the crevice itself, no, it was on the outside. And as you'd come to the top of the crest, you would see some of these grates scattered around. We'd look down. It was quite deep, but not so deep that you couldn't see the bottom. My friends and I always dismissed this. We never really thought much into it as children. We were far too busy putting up swing tires and the like, and for the most part, it was always in the back of our minds. However, as we grew up, we needed a place to hang out. Of course, the woods were okay, but not always enough for our adolescent escapades. My friends had all started smoking weed, and admittedly, so had I. I don't do it anymore, but back then, pretty much everyone in my school year was doing it, and not wanting to be left out, I committed. We needed a place where we could smoke, and give enough time that the smell would wear off our clothes before we got home. We tended to do this in the woods, but sometimes families with dogs would walk by, and seeing as it was a very small village, we didn't want people to recognize us and tell on our mothers. Regardless, that's when we saw the golden opportunity with the grates. We looked down one, and there was definitely something down there. We could see a whole load of litter on the floor, maybe even some dead animals. It wasn't that easy to see down to the bottom. So, we spent the whole afternoon trying to find an entrance. Surely there must be one somewhere, we assumed. But alas, nothing. It wasn't until a few weeks later, when we were truly becoming desperate, did my friends come up with an idea. We needed to explore this place ourselves. So, one sunny Saturday morning, we got our shovels and made our way down to the pit. We started digging in an area that we thought would be close enough in order to get in. Boy, were we wrong. Dig after dig, we seemed to make no progress into discovering what was underneath us. It took us about a week and a half of solid digging and a whole load of sort of cave-ins until we realized we needed to reinforce our structure with wooden planks. This seemed to combat the problem. We managed to make a very small opening on the bottom. It was about 1 meter by 1 meter. And in the end, we made it through. It was a triumphant moment, and we made sure to cover our entrance with leaves and debris so that no one else could enter our secret hiding place. Besides, it was very unlikely. No one ever came down here except for us. I think they knew this was our hangout spot. So, therein we went, and began exploring like crazy, seeing what kind of wonders were hidden in this long forgotten part of town. We weren't really sure what we were expecting to find. Treasure, some kind of old structure, something of interest or value, surely. I mean, why would the grates be there in the first place? It must have been something and then it was blown up. We were sure of it. But looking around, we didn't find much. When we got to what we assumed was the end, it was very, very dark. It was almost like all the light had been swallowed up. We needed to get some light in here. It was senseless trying to continue. So, we went back home, and the next day came back with a bunch of torches, ready to explore the area. We went further and further in, and I have to admit, it went on a lot further than I thought. That's when finally, we came across a cave. This cave was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It had strange markings in chalk that were laid upon the stone and the dirt. Markings of a strange language I did not identify, as well as people, planes and cars. So that concreted in my mind that it wasn't some kind of historical find, but just some ramblings of someone crazy. At least, that's what I thought. Most of my friends were too chicken to go in any further. The cave smelled moist, damp, and was very ominous. I have to admit, I didn't really want to go in myself, but needing to prove my bravado, I was the first one in, torch in hand, looking around. It was a little bit damp and a little bit smelly, and the further in I got, that I noticed it was not just one cave, but a network of tunnels under the ground. I didn't want to get lost, so we needed to find a way to ensure that we could get back safely. I found some chalk on the ground, not like a stick of chalk, more like a lump of rock, and we started to draw a line in the dirt, one that we could follow if we got lost back to the entrance, with little arrows pointing to the way out. That was our smartest move to date. Using the chalk and our torches, we explored a fair portion of the caves. Some led to dead ends. Others were dead ends, but had more of the strange writing on them. And there was one that was particularly interesting. There was a rudimentary bed, an old rusting tin, and some old cans as well. It looked like someone had used to live here, long ago. I picked up the tin and shook it to see if there was anything in there. Jackpot. There was weight, and I hastily opened the tin and cut myself, not noticing that it had rather sharp edges. Upon looking inside, I was a bit disappointed to find some rusted coins and a few papers. I pocketed the papers for later, telling myself I would read them in the evening, and carried on with my investigation. It took us about a week of investigating until we discovered that the caves had another exit. There was a forest, much further away than we usually went to. In our bike travels, I think we'd only been there twice, and it came off in a similar kind of area, with grates at the top and then a small exit surrounded by foliage. No one had ever noticed it seems, or if they did, they didn't tend to go in there. And we were content with our find. We were happy that we knew where the true entrance to the caves were, and assumed that maybe what had happened is that the caves were discovered and the grates put in for ventilation, and then when the bomb fell, one of the exits was sealed up, and that was that. But now we had our own secret exit. Being happy with what we knew, we all returned home, and it was on that night that I decided to read the papers further. It was a whole lot of ramblings. Everyone was apparently going to die, and that this place wasn't safe. The person was talking about someone called Jackie an awful lot, and how Jackie would never see him again. I didn't know who wrote this letter. It was in pen, and me not being a historian, I wasn't sure how old this was, but I kept them in my bedside drawer and just left them there. We kept going back to smoke every once in a while. Admittedly, once we'd discovered where most of the cave went to, which for the most part was dead ends, we grew bored of it, teenagers. 4 months had passed since we discovered the cave's alternate exit. We still regularly showed up to share a smoke or two in the evenings, and on an evening much like this, did we all come back for our smokes. We were chatting and generally having a good time, and we were nearly done before it was time for us to head home. That's when everything changed. We heard something off in the distance, a low kind of growl. My friend had told us before that he had informed his brother of the cave as well, in case he and his buddies wanted to use it. And part of us thought that it must have been his brother in an attempt to scare us. So we did nothing and mutually agreed to turn off all the torches so that when he approached we could jump scare him. We were being really clever and waited in the darkness for a noise or someone to speak. Footsteps grew closer, and we waited until we were sure they were upon us. We thought that we'd hear talking at least, or some breathing perhaps. But as the steps grew nearer, there was just silence, the occasional plod hitting the muddy floor, and that was it. We were starting to get creeped out. It must have been someone else. It definitely wasn't his brother. At this point, Barry flicked on his torch, unable to bear the suspense, and shone the light in the direction of where the sound was coming from. At that moment, Barry illuminated what can only be described as a monster. It was a creature of about 9 feet, tall, dark, menacing looking, and with the head of what appeared to be a deformed dog. We were all fixated on this creature, and without a moment to lose did it begin charging at us. Within seconds, we were on our feet, torches on, and running like the wind. We were pretty confident with where we were going, having come to these caves an awful lot by now, and we weren't far from the entrance. But we relied on those little white lines like our lives depended on it. The entrance was so small that going through was terrifying, as we all didn't fit, and everyone was trampling each other to get through quicker than the other. I was at the back. I was fat and slow, and nowhere near as fast as my other counterparts. I shone my flashlight back, hoping, praying that whatever it was wouldn't be there, and that perhaps it was just our collective imaginations. We were all quite high after all. But nay, there was something there, and it was charging at me. I dropped my flashlight and followed my friends and managed to dive through the entrance in the nick of time. We kept on running. We didn't even look back, and we left our bikes in the pit. When we were all a fair distance away, did we finally turn around? There was nothing behind us. Barry was the first to speak up and asked if it was just him, or if he was high. Or did we all see that? We collectively nodded in silence and parted ways. The next day at school was tough. I had barely slept that night, and judging by my friends' faces, it was very clear that neither did they. I didn't really know what to say. None of us did, and we all just kept quiet and tried pretending like it never happened. We didn't go back down to smoke there again. In fact, we never returned to those woods. I had to ask my dad to go collect my bike because I left it there in the frenzy. I think my friends asked their parents to do the same. We found another spot, not too far away from that, and decided to chill there from then on. But never again did we want to go exploring, and never did we want to know what the monster was that lived underneath the grates and in the cave. Some things are best left undisturbed, and I deeply regret ever sating my curiosity and trying to find out what was there. I took a trip to Iceland. Me, my girlfriend, my two friends, and their significant others. We had it on our itinerary to stop and check out a lava tube, an underground tunnel that lava used to flow through. This tunnel was completely underground after the first 200 meters or so it twisted and turned, so we all lost sight of daylight from the entrance. Pitch black, total darkness. We start our little hike. The tube is only 2 kilometers, if that's from the start to the dead end. It was July, but there was still snow in some of the tunnels that was open to the outside. Very cool. We came across a few couples who told us that the rocks get treacherous, and they did not have flashlights. We had a few friends, and were all fairly athletic, and figured, why not? After about an hour of going up and down the larger boulders and volcanic rocks, we get to a large hill in the tunnel. At the top of this hill is a large boulder, just sitting very precariously at the top. The boulder was tapered off a bit on the back side, so it wasn't bad to get up on the front side. We saw at first it was flat, not smooth, but just a straight, flat part of rock. I climbed up because it would be great to sport a Superman pose for a picture and a good storytelling piece. I climbed up, got into position, and my buddy snaps the picture. After he takes it with flash, one of the girls noticed something odd to my left. Everyone shines their flashlight in the area, and about 6 feet to my left, suspended 10 to 12 feet above the cave, was a rope, anchored to the ceiling. Came down out of the anchor to a knot about 4 feet away from the ceiling. The knot turned out to be a loop. The loop had been cut at the bottom. It looked a lot like a noose. Yellow nylon rope, suspended 1.75 kilometers into a lava tube, 20-ish feet above the floor of the cave. The strangest part was there was no easy way to get to the roof to anchor it. It was a very well done anchor, and had to have been there a while. It looked like someone was determined to come out and spend their final hours in absolute darkness. We kept going, but noped about it the whole time. A 19-year-old man who spent 60 hours locked alone inside a gated southern Indiana cave says he feels lucky to be alive. Indiana University freshman Lucas Camvar was on a spelunking trip to Sullivan Cave about 10 miles south of Bloomington, where he became separated on Sunday afternoon from 12 other members of the university's caving club. When he eventually reached the cave entrance, Kavar found club members had padlocked its gate, unaware that he remained inside. He couldn't get a cell phone signal and screamed for hours, hoping motorists passing by might hear him. It took me a little while to wrangle my emotions and sort of approach things analytically, and sensibly come up with a plan to survive, Kavar said. The Bloomington man, whose parents are Indiana University linguistics professors, tried picking the padlock with a paper, to no avail. Dressed in light clothes, hiking boots and a helmet, Kavar had a plastic bag, 2 energy bars, and 2 empty plastic water bottles, a cell phone and a wallet. He used the energy bar wrappers to collect moisture and the water bottle to collect rainfall and puddled cave water. He also licked the cave's damp walls to quench his thirst. Hunger drove him to consider foraging for cave crickets, although he didn't eat any of the small insects. After his parents filed a missing persons report with the university police, a high school friend informed the caving club president that he was missing. 2 club leaders immediately returned to the cave late Tuesday. They discovered him uninjured and asleep behind the locked gate. He said he was really glad to be alive and felt like he was given a second chance, who returned to classes on Thursday and had no more plans for cave exploration. A message posted by the Caving Club's president on a website for Indiana University student organizations said that the club's rigorous protocols for accounting for members during the cave excursions had failed. We had a failure in our leadership to closely follow all the safety procedures, the message states. I was with my brother and a friend in Pepper Sauce Cave, Arizona. We were deep inside, and I found a small tunnel that went off to the right of a path that you can crawl through. This tunnel was very narrow, and I had to crawl slowly, and you could almost feel the top press against your back. I told my brother to wait for me for 15 minutes, and if I didn't return to come and get me. So I crawl in about 80 feet, and this tunnel starts to branch off to the right. It's getting narrower and narrower, and I thought I saw an opening at the end. I get closer with my flashlight, and the opening is not as big as I thought it was. So it's time to turn around. I tried, but no room. The walls were almost on both sides of my ribs, and the ceiling was nearly on top of my back. So, 50 feet later, I'm crawling backwards on my chest, which was very difficult because there wasn't any room to turn around. So I get myself turned around at this one point and head back. The tunnel looked different now, and I branched off another path that I didn't see crawling forwards, but crawling back it was visible. I was totally lost and disoriented, on my stomach and very cramped. I was getting pretty nervous, so I started to scream to my brother and my friend, but I didn't hear them. I screamed louder and louder, but still didn't hear them, and I crawled on my stomach a little further and tried again, and I very, very faintly heard their voices, only they were below me. So I yelled to my brother at the top of my lungs to come in and get me. He starts crawling and yelling at me. The whole time, I have no idea where he was, just following the sound of his voice. Suddenly, around the bend, I see a flashlight very far away, and I realized I was way off. I was so happy to see him. I used to cave a lot. I haven't been recently, and need to go again. One of the last times I went, we explored some caves that I'd never been in before, which led to 2 somewhat scary incidents for me. Cave number 1 was my type of cave. Wet, muddy, tight spaces and lots of crawling. The stuff I love. To get out of the cave, though, required getting through 20 meters of very deep water. In other words, swimming. In overalls and gumboots. As you can imagine, for someone like me, who is not a strong swimmer, I went under pretty quickly. even with a blown-up wine bladder in my shirt for flotation. I made it out, obviously, but swallowed a hell of a lot of water, and probably came very close to drowning, which is why I was really pissed when the guy who'd been behind me the whole time asked why I hadn't used the narrow ledge on the side to walk on, like they had, and avoided swimming. Nice of them to tell me about it. Cave number 2 was more of a pretty cave, which is still nice but not as fun. So on the way back I decided I'd squeeze through the little side tunnel running along the main path. Some of the guys had used it on our way down, so I knew it was safe, but none of us took into account that taking the tunnel down meant I was now using it up, and with a fairly sharp bend in the middle, probably close to 90 degrees, sure enough, when I tried to turn on my side, you get around the bend, and I got stuck. There's a photo of me looking at the guys out on the end, and you can see that my shoulders and hips are bigger than the hole I need to get out of. It took a lot of pushing on one end and pulling on the other, but I did eventually get out. Funnily enough, no one else wanted to try it afterwards. 2 friends and I were caving. We had planned to do a trip through the cave of Bowden, going in one entrance and coming out on the other side. About 90% of the way through, our one friend slammed her knee onto a sharp, pointy rock and could not put any weight onto it. Crawling back out on the knee was out of the question, and climbing up out of the back exit was tricky. Any accident in a cave is 10 times more serious than inside. But that wasn't really the scariest part of the trip. We finally made it out to the back of the cave at 1 AM. We were hiking through the woods slowly back to our car, mostly paying attention to our hurt friend. Suddenly, there was this blood-curdling scream that came directly from ahead. We looked up to see a pair of eyes at roughly eye level drop to the ground and slowly move to our left. In hindsight, it was probably just a bobcat that we startled. The single most instant real-life jump scare I have ever experienced. I have some creepy experiences. In the Borneo jungle, where our local guide wanted to show us an ancient limestone network, there were more bats than I'd ever come across in several cave experiences. I'm not a caver, just an avid adventurer with cave experience. There were probably 5 million bats, but that wasn't the creepy bit. Stumbling on semi-mummified skeletons was. My guide failed to tell me the caves were ancient burial sites. Turning to see a few skulls inches away from my face was psychologically and physiologically inconvenient. Scariest was probably a cave in the UK. Proper crawling and squeezing. It wasn't pleasant the time I thought we were gonna die. We got trapped in a small room, flooded to our ankles, where the tunnels in and out were fully submerged. You kinda ascended into this pocket/room chamber, assuming we'd either suffocate or drown. It wasn't great. Fortunately, the water level dropped just enough after a couple of hours for us to crawl out of, breathing with our heads sideways and mouths pressed practically against the ceiling like in the movies, where the ships are sinking. That's always slightly eerie in British caves, knowing that some of the deaths and disasters that happened right where you're standing. Like one in Yorkshire, where several school kids died. Being in the same place, and knowing that the claustrophobic cavity you're stood in was someone's final view. I grew up in limestone country. There are quite a few caves. I was on a school trip, and a few adventurous guys and myself found a very small passage that was big enough to fit through. It didn't get any bigger, and was very tight. Eventually, it ended in a slit about 3 meters high, with me at the front. Screw that feeling. I hadn't really thought it through. I guess we all expected to discover a huge chamber and be able to turn around. I waited for the train of people behind me to back out, and I was panicking. But I held it together, and my view for about 10 minutes was this little impassable slit. It was all fine in the end, obviously. Just a lot of very difficult, very slow backwards crawling on my belly, with the roof on my back. One summer, I was on a 3-month spelunking trip. We were going to explore 13 caves that were only lightly documented. One in particular was 12 chambers deep, before we came upon the small opening for the water source that created this particular system. I was the only one that could fit, so I was the first choice to head down. About 150 feet down, and around a few corners, I find myself at a small opening into another larger chamber. The only way I could make it through this opening was hands forward, only pulling myself with my fingers inch by inch. I found myself with my chest pressed tight in the opening, when I heard a noise echoing in the chamber. I realized that it was my heart pressed against the rocks so tightly I could hear my heartbeat echoing in the cave. Well, I managed to pop through, and I turned back around to mark the hole I came out of. I looked down and saw the lower half of a human jaw. I suddenly felt panic. I imagined this hole was like someone sticking a hockey puck in their mouth. It would go in, but it wouldn't come out. I basically grabbed the jawbone and leapt through the hole, tearing my spine all along the back. This was one of the creepiest things I have found in my lifetime. To everyone wondering whether I kept the jawbone and turned it into a funky CD holder or what, I was young and stupid at the time, and had ended up giving it to my hippie ex-girlfriend. Would have still loved to have had it though. A few years ago, I was on a caving expedition with my friend. There was this really tight squeeze that I was certain I could get through, but I got stuck in the middle. I tried going in even further, only realizing that that was it, and I wasn't coming out. My friend tried pulling me, and as much as it hurt, and as much as he pulled, I wasn't going anywhere. He just wasn't strong enough, and I was stuck good, for all my stubbornness. He had to run and get help, and we were about an hour's drive away from anyone remotely close. Just as he was leaving the cave, by chance, another group of cavers were just coming in. They all came to my rescue, and it took 3 of them to finally pull me out. My God, did that hurt. I was sure that I was going to die in that cave, and it put me off caving for the longest time. I was so grateful that I didn't die that day. I was exploring a large ancient cemetery outside of a small town in Israel, alone. There were Canaanite tombs that were thousands of years old. Many in this region have been left unexcavated, so the area I was in looked like a huge, low hill full of little dimples marking where these tombs were. So I was wandering around these shaft tombs, which were dug deep into the ground, and then branched out with different spots carved out of the rock for family members to be lain. Some of the tombs were open to the air and quite deep. I got a little too close to the edge and fell in. I fell maybe 10 feet and was stuck down there. It was a vertical drop, and the sides were loose with stone and rubble. It was the middle of the day in Israel in the summer. I had no water, and my cell service was kaput, since I was below ground. I remember just standing there, looking up out of this hole in the ground, with the blazing sun above me, and realizing how silent it was. It was an awful feeling, stuck in an ancient grave. like I was experiencing the same silence that had existed there forever, and I was now a part of it, or some sort of deep thought like that. Anyway, I tried to scramble out, but the sides were too eroded and kept crumbling when I attempted to hoist myself out of there. I was really scared I might bring down the whole wall of this tomb and become the most recent burial in a few thousand years. Anyway, I was stuck for maybe 15 minutes before levering my way up by holding onto some roots and bracing myself on more stable bits of stone. The feeling of getting the hell out of there was so relieving and personal. I rarely share this story because I was such a fool. I've explored many sites afterwards, but always much more prepared than I was that day. I hadn't even told anyone where I was going when I left the house. When I was a kid, we found a cave way back in the woods at our cottage. Now, when I say cave, you have to use your imagination, because this was an 8x5x4-ish hole in the wall. This became a project for us to find mosses and ferns to adorn our hideout, and make a door out of bark and sticks. We came back to our hideout in early spring to find the door out of place. I picked it up and moved it close to the entrance to replace the door, only to find a large, furry friend squatting in our hideout. Now, normally we don't have any of the large fauna on our side of the lake, but we still had taken wildlife safety just in case. So, when I quickly backed off and mouthed bear, my 8-year-old sister did what she taught to do and started yelling as loudly as she could. She only half paid attention to the bear-aware course. Never wake a sleeping bear, and never scare a bear in a corner. Thank God we were far enough away that by the time it woke up and squeezed out, it decided to run away from us, instead of maul us. I and my bunch of teenage hooligans often went spelunking in rural Missouri, armed with nothing but flashlights and booze. We followed a guy who knew the way to a terrific cave. To get there, we ducked a fence, trespassed wildly, and forced a small creep following this one guy. The entrance was under a small rock overhang, and right after the entrance was a pit/gorge type thing, 20 feet deep or so, and full of water and mud. Too impassable to be worth it. But the pit could be skirted by a ledge leading to the right and into a tunnel. That tunnel was the way we always went. It led to one of my favourite places on earth. Even though we only went there 4 or 5 times, and I could never find the place on my own, I think of it as a small chapel, with a magnificent wall of quartz and trickling water feature. It was all set up with candles and altars for parties, rituals and whatever. I heard some people secretly got married there. Excellent. And we carried on as you do. Then someone gets the idea, instead of taking the first tunnel, to climb through the impassable pit by the entrance and check out the crevice on the other side. We agreed that head to toe covered in mud was an acceptable thing to be today, and made the climb. Another small tunnel, and we were in filthy business. Bear den. Bear den. Not 10 feet from the far side of the pit, and therefore another 40 to 50 feet from our beloved party spot. We saw tracks made of the same mud now coating our foolish forms, and a bed of leaf matter. No present bear, but we still got the hell out of there immediately, and did not go back again. I was driving in the middle of nowhere in central New Mexico, on a dirt road that leads to an abandoned mine. We come upon a car, maybe early 60s Ford Fairline. The car had US government license plates, and I counted 11 antennas on it. We have to slow down to pass it, and look inside, and I see two men dressed in thick lapel black suits, with white shirts and thin black ties, and regulation high and tight haircuts. The driver lifts a walkie-talkie and starts saying something into it, a very large walkie-talkie. We drive by in silence and just stare at them. Me and the driver don't say anything to each other for a couple of minutes, as we are quite stunned. Then we both start talking. Did you see that? Who do you think they are? Why does he need a walkie-talkie if he has all of those antennas? Didn't they look like they were from the 60s? After less than a mile, we decided to turn around and maybe talk to them. We raced back to where they were, and they were no longer there. We decided to try and catch them up, and we drive like hell all the way back to town. We never saw them, and they were not on any side roads. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. Well done for making it to the end of the video. That's quite a feat. Now, if you liked it, don't forget to drop a like and leave a comment, as it goes a long way and lets your fellow viewers know if the video was liked or not. Don't forget that if you enjoyed tonight's episode, you might as well subscribe and press the little bell icon to be notified every time I post, which is every night. If there's a story that you would like to share and have it read on the channel, feel free to post it to my Reddit or alternatively send it to my email. All information can be found in the description. Speaking of description, make sure you add lots of it, as well as paragraphing and punctuation to optimize the chances of your story being read. But anyway, for now guys, it's time for me to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.